Thank you, Claire. I'm Ken Torino, Manager of Community Partnerships and Resource Development at Historic New England. I want to welcome you all to this really special lecture that I'm excited about. The Church of the Covenant is iconic in Boston, one of our real gems. And we're really fortunate tonight to have the Reverend Rob Mark with us, who is the pastor of the Church of the Covenant. And he will tell us a little bit about the church, its history, and that will lead into our featured speaker tonight, Roberto Serpentino. I've been talking with him or corresponding for months now, so finally get to meet in person. Let me tell you a little bit about him, his bio. He's the principal with Serpentino Stained Glass Inc., which is located in Needham, Mass. He has conserved many of the windows here at the Church of the Covenant, which you'll learn about tonight. But his experience conserving stained glass windows spans 33 years. He's conserved numerous windows, including some of the oldest figured painted windows in the country at Trinity Church on Wall Street, New York City. He's worked on John Lafarge windows at Trinity, in Trinity Church in Boston. He's worked at the Church of Christ Scientist. The list is very, very extensive. I was really happy to see that you had worked on the 13 Lafarge opalescent windows at Salve Regina University in Newport, which I had the opportunity to see. And also you can see some of his work at the Lafarge windows at the McMullen Museum at Boston College. He is a founding member of the American Glass Guild. Roberto is the current chair of its education committee. He is a fellow of the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works and a recognized professional of the Association for Preservation Technology International. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Reverend Mark.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Claire. Thank you all. It's really an honor to be here tonight. As Ken has said, my name is Rob Mark, and I have the profound honor of serving as lead pastor at Church of the Covenant. This is a church that sits in Boston's historic Back Bay neighborhood. We are a progressive faith community that's deeply blessed to call its physical home a National Historic Landmark sanctuary that rests at the intersection of Newbury and Berkeley streets. It's an absolute architectural treasure, I have to say, that sits atop a 1,100 sunken wooden pilings that hold it aloft the sacred waters once stewarded by the first peoples of this area, the proud Massachusetts and Matakeesit people, for whose present-day sovereignty, dignity, and rights we are all committed. 2 months after President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, church members began a 2-year building project to sculpt this Richard M. Upjohn designed Gothic revival sanctuary out of local Roxbury pudding stone. Then in the 1890s, the sanctuary was completely redecorated by Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company, from all of the woodwork to the wainscoting, to the lecterns, to the pews, and of course, to the 42 stained glass windows. This church represents the largest ecclesiastical space designed by Tiffany and Company in the US, perhaps in the world. We could debate that one. But indeed, it is a treasure, it is a gem. It's a gem that belongs not just to Church of the Covenant, this live and alive community of faith, but to the future. We feel it's on loan to us from the future. And therefore, we as a church believe in the power of storytelling. Right now, there's a lot of mythology that's being lifted in our world. And I think the missing truths that lie in the past are so vital for us as we move ahead into the future. Our church is committed to justice, to following the ways of Jesus and the ways of justice and peace and nonviolent love. But storytelling is so important. And the windows in the sanctuary are part of that storytelling. They lift the stories of a God who is in the world and values people as reflections of God. And so those who restore these windows are keepers of truths. And I don't want to put too much of a fine point on this, Roberto, but I am now going to pass the mic to you. You, my friend, are a keeper of stories and a truth teller. Your restoration work that we have had the profound privilege of being blessed by since 2010, I believe, with Church of the Covenant, restoring many of our windows, including right now with our Renew the Light campaign, our clear story windows, the ones that bring in the most amount of light into our sanctuary to bring about the vitality in that space. Your restoration work has really inspired us to be keepers of that which came before us and the people that will come after us. So I appreciate your truth-telling work. We are blessed by you. The bio that you heard from Ken, just the only thing it missed was the personality that you're going to taste a little bit right now tonight. If you haven't met Roberto, he is full of vitality, of joy, and he brings that with him into his work of restoration. So we're blessed by him. I pray all of us tonight will be blessed by him. And truly, thank you all for paying attention to this, this story tonight about telling more stories and restoring the past so that we can move forward in more truthful ways in the future. Roberto, we bless you and we're grateful for you and your storytelling tonight.
Well, thank you, Pastor Rob. And as you just stated, I feel honored to be part of Church of the Covenant and its restoration and the restoration of the stained glass window. It really is a profound honor as a craftsman, as a conservator, to be working and have been working in such a really an iconic building. And we're so lucky and blessed in Massachusetts and Boston to have such a great building. And I speak for myself and my fellow craftsmen that work with me in my studio, that we all pitch in this effort to maintain and restore and conserve such wonderful artwork and such beautiful windows. So thank you, and thank to everyone at Church of the Covenant. So, and I am so honored to be part of this tonight, this evening, with the Historic New England. It's really important, and it's just a great opportunity to display and to talk about Church of the Covenant and the windows. So I will go ahead and move on with my slideshow and talk a little bit about what we've been working on for the last few years, and look forward to questions that folks may have. So here's Church of the Covenant. As Pastor Rob said, it's at the corner of Newbury and Berkeley Street, a beautiful brownstone church. I did some research in preparing for this lecture, and you can see the 1904 Church of the Covenant and the church today, and not much has changed other than traffic and trees and extra buildings around the building, but it's still standing and it's still just as stunning as it was in 1904. Now, this is an important photograph in doing my research for this talk, and since starting working at Church of the Covenant. So this photograph is probably 1867, more or less, and it's important for the folks looking at this and tonight, if you can just memorize the facade of the south elevation. You're looking at Newbury Street, really. And you can see the grisaille painted windows on the right side of the screen that I've included. And the entire church was decorated with these painted grisaille windows early on, 1865, thereabouts. So the entire church was built and decorated with these grisaille painted windows. And in the north transept in Church of the Covenant is the only remaining original window from 1865 before opalescent glass, which we will discuss later on into the webinar tonight. Before, at 1865, this is the traditional stained glass window. Opalescent glass wasn't created or invented or used yet in stained glass. So the entire Church of the Covenant was decorated with these painted grisaille. Grisaille is a French term meaning gray. So this is what Church of the Covenant looks like. And then along comes Tiffany. And in Mid-1890s, the entire church was rededicated and redesigned by Tiffany, Tiffany Studios. And it was a whole movement. Opalescent glass was just invented, if you will, per se. Not opalescent glass had been used in vases and glassware since the Egyptians, but in stained glass, it hadn't been really used yet. John Lafarge started using opalescent glass, and then there was Tiffany and a whole lot of different artists back then that started using opalescent glass and stained glass windows. And Tiffany, being a very successful artist, designer, and studio, designing thousands of windows throughout this country, decorating churches. So Church of the Covenant, as Pastor Rob said, 42 Tiffany windows, chandelier, bronze chancel rail, organ screens, decorative wainscoting, on and on. It's just, it really is a museum. And if folks who are attending this lecture tonight have not been at in Church of the Covenant, please go, because it really is an icon. It's really a museum. It's just all the original Tiffany windows, of course, except the north transept window from 1865, but it's definitely worth a trip. And it's just a beautiful sanctuary. And the chandelier, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the earliest electrically lit chandelier in Massachusetts, designed by Tiffany. It's just a gem. So here we are. Here you can see on the left, circa 1867, Church of the Covenant from, again, Newbury Street. And you can see, if you pay attention to the windows on the facade, you can see from, and if you remember the photograph I just showed, it's all that pattern, that grisaille painted pattern that repeats over and over. And 1904, you can see the different already in the architecture, where you don't really see that grisaille painted windows in the 1904. That's because Tiffany in the mid-1890s redesigned the church. All the windows except the north transept window were designed by Tiffany, the chandelier and all. So it was just really a whole redesigning of Church of the Covenant. So this is what the south elevation of Church of the Covenant in 1867 would have looked like, with the windows, painted windows shown on the right. But if you go to Church of the Covenant today, that same elevation is the Ascended Christ, designed by Tiffany Studios in 1893. And you can start to see in that elevation that the grisaille windows are gone. Even the clerestory windows are Tiffany. So it's just, the entire church was redesigned by Tiffany. So speaking of the 1865 north transept window, it's the only remaining original non-Tiffany window in the church. However, Tiffany did submit a watercolor for that north transept window that, for some reason, maybe, who knows, funds or for whatever reason, it was never completed, it was never executed. And the watercolor, the original watercolor, is today at the MFA. And in a way, it would have been nice if the entire church was really completed by Tiffany. But as a craftsman and conservator, I actually think it's pretty cool that there's still the original 1865 grisaille window in one of the elevations of the church. So my lecture really tonight, it's really about more about the windows and the restoration and what's involved and what we've been going through these years. What is really the difference between, and I get this a lot and people ask, what's the difference between traditional stained glass windows and plated opalescent windows? On the left side of the screen, you can see this is a detailed close-up of one of the 1865 windows from Church of the Covenant. And on the right side is the angel from Tiffany, Angeline Cornelius window that we recently reinstalled this past summer, actually, at Church of the Covenant. So I'm going to touch briefly on the difference and in fabrication and design, just so folks can understand. This is your traditional, typical stained glass window, single layer, meaning there's just one layer of glass throughout the window. You can see on the bottom, I prepared a sketch showing just one single layer of glass and the lead keeping the glass together. And so it's just one layer of glass. The glass is painted. Here you can see an example of a single layer traditional window. Each piece of glass is selected, painted. If it's a blue background, it's blue glass, and then the details are painted. If it's the red roses, it's a red piece of glass, and then the details of the roses are painted, and so forth and so on. So this is what typically you see in a church, traditional stained glass window from the European medieval times in Europe and throughout the United States. But then along comes John Lafarge, who started using opalescent glass in late 1880s. Tiffany took over with it as far as, you know, larger studio, wealthier family. He had glass houses and produced and manufactured his own glass. But this shown on the screen here, you can see, and this is just a small example really of how many different textures and color and really different textures and undulation even within the glass. You can see some of what's called drapery glass. It's not flat, it's actually molded, stretched and pulled and shrunk. And there's on the top left, you can see what's called confetti glass. There's those little chunks of glass within the opalescent glass. So that's your opalescent glass. This is what made Tiffany well known, and his windows unique and different than others. They really, the difference is in traditional stained glass, every piece of glass is painted, not only the flesh, the faces, hands, but the robes and the flowers and the background. What Tiffany and John Lafarge and the artists of the Opalescent era introduced, and their goal was to only use opalescent glass and only paint the flesh and not use paint in the field or for any of the details. So if you see a Tiffany window with the angel with the robe and flowers, all the detail is created with layers of glass, different types of glass. And so that's what makes it so unique and different than your traditional glass. And here's a sketch and an example of the anatomy of a plated window versus just single traditional stained glass window. You can see here on the top left where it shows two pieces of glass and then one piece of glass at the bottom, but they're all stacked and layered. And it's not 2 or 3 layers throughout. They're randomly positioned and stacked to play. They really painted with light. They didn't use paints and into traditional stained glass paint to achieve the details, but they just use glass, opalescent glass, textured glass, could be drapery glass, confetti glass, all sorts of different opalescent glass that just created this very unique and depth and three-dimensional effect. And on the bottom left, it's very common, not unusual, to see a plated opalescent window, especially by Tiffany, where you have, again, all these pieces of glass stacked, and it could be 3 on one area, 2 on another, and then another piece of glass stacked separately. But then if on the bottom left, you see that little, I'm going to call it a squiggly drawing of a glass, which also mimics the actual photograph that I have on the far right. That's what drapery glass is. That's what Tiffany used a lot in his clothing, robes, sometimes flowers. And with that comes the challenge, not just of the glass, but for us conservators, is the type of lead that we have to use in releading or reassembling the windows. It's not just a flat traditional lead. A lot of it has to be custom made. And we've encountered a lot of that in the repair and restoration of the windows at Church of the Covenant. So this is a panel from Cornelius from Church of the Covenant that we restored recently, where we installed this past summer. Again, a good example of the layers that Tiffany used, the technique of layering glass to achieve this three-dimensional effect, and also do away with paint and just basically really paint with light. There could be a brown piece of glass at the bottom, a yellow piece of glass in the middle, and a green or purple piece of glass on top. And again, here I'm showing 3 layers of glass in the bottom section, the Feet of Cornelius, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there were 3 layers of glass throughout the window. In fact, there were not. There were 2 layers in some areas, 1 layer in some, 3 or 4 in some others. So they really layered the windows and played with the light to achieve the what they were their intention was. This is a close-up photograph of the Foot of Cornelius, again showing the 3 layers. Not related to Church of the Covenant, but just to talk about plated windows and the fabrication and complexity of plated windows, and just to show the difference in, again, the coloration that they used. There's 5 layers of glass here. As you can see on the far right on the exterior, it was more of a pink reddish glass, and it just moved to a darker and darker to a dark blue glass, plate number 2, and then number 1 on the interior. So this is just very common technique that Tiffany and Lafarge used and the artists of that era, but it just makes for a very complex fabrication originally for the artists, but for us conservators and restorers, it's certainly a challenge. And this is an example of a Tiffany window we've restored with 6 layers of glass. So it's just, we never know what we're going to find. It's a 3 layers, 2 layers, 5 or 6. And they, as you can see here, they use different, there's different, not just textured glass, but color, and there's ripple, streaky, acid etch, clear glass, green. So it's really a variety. And the only thing that they painted was the flesh. So as conservators and restorers, it's all great that there's these layers of glass that make these incredible windows that are just so unique. But what's under all these layers of glass, and what's all these plates that are stacked over 80, 100, 150 years, you can only imagine what can be trapped. On the left side is actually the Foot of Cornelius from the Angeline Cornelius window at Church of the Covenant. And this is just a small example of, once we started taking the pieces apart, what we found under the layers. But over the years, we found many unique and interesting things. Of course, soot, it could be from coal, from smog. A lot of it is candle smoke, believe it or not. And you can see on the right side, after I cleaned this piece of glass, my fingers are pretty black because that's exactly what was trapped between the layers. But we found some interesting things. This is on the top left, a pile of dirt, spider nests, and even little pieces of wood with, who knows, termites. And so this is, it's always interesting and challenging, but the thing to remember and to keep in mind is it's not just what our challenge in conservation, but what does all this dirt and the spider nest and the habitat for insects and the wood and the candle smoke, it obviously diminishes the quality and quantity of light transmission for the window. It darkens what the window is no longer what what it was meant to be when it was first installed, because all of these elements and insects and dust and debris is trapped in between the layers. So if you have a window with 3 layers of glass, you really have 6 layers and of surface dust and soot and so forth. So the Angeline Cornelius, we removed it in 2019. And then of course, we all know what happened after that. COVID hit, but we reinstalled it this past summer. It did take us about a year to complete the window, but again, because of COVID, we kind of had to slow down and reorganize ourselves. And I'm sure the same thing with Church of the Covenant, but it was an interesting project, to say the least. We have encountered many issues with the window. It was severely deteriorated, which is not uncommon with windows of this age, but also the fact that this all the multiple layers, it's just heavier than your traditional stained glass window. And so then over a period of time, it just starts to, glass starts to crack and it starts to shift and fall apart and collapse. This is by far probably the most deflected panel I've seen in my 30 plus years in stained glass conservation. This is not meant to be folded this way. It's actually supposed to be flat, but this is how severe the deflection was in one of the bottom panels, and actually both bottom panels of the Angeline Cornelius window. There was severe lead deterioration throughout the windows, the 2 windows, in interior and exterior. You can see on both left and right side where the glass is actually separated from the lead. The lead had actually cracked, and it was just the glass shifted and the glass was dislodged. And on the top right next to Cornelius' head, on the back of his neck, you can see where the glass just pulled away from the lead. This window was literally falling apart by the time we got to the church to remove it. On the left side, all the red circles, I outlined and circled the areas where there was severe lead deterioration, where the lead had actually cracked and broken away from lead and glass. On the right side is a close-up of the lead deterioration and the glass separating, dislodging from the lead matrix. So restoration, conservation, repair, maintenance, it's all important, especially in a building like Church of the Covenant with such unique and important windows. But any project and any repair and restoration project that we work on, it starts with documentation. It's extremely important. You start with photography, of course. On the left side, you see what we call a rubbing. It's basically a cartoon or a rubbing of that particular section or panel. And if you look at the top left of the left slide with the rubbing, you'll see a bunch of handwritten notes. We often write our own notes and information, what we found, and it's helpful for us as we're restoring the window, and also for the next conservator who has to work on the window, hopefully in 200, 300 years. But then you'll see all these stamps, one on the top left with an M, and then the triangle with nothing. And so those are all restoration and documentation information for us. The triangle with the M on the top left means multiple crack. And if you look at the panel on the right, not sure it's clear, but you can see that it's been taped because there's multiple cracks. So we annotate the rubbings for us as conservators, but also it gets turned over to the church, hopefully in archives, and hopefully the next person who has to repair these windows has more information that we had. But also, if God forbid the window get destroyed by fire or vandalism, with the photographs that we have and the documentation rubbings, the window could actually be refabricated and reconstructed. Of course, we don't have the glass that Tiffany did, but we can hopefully and possibly come as close as possible. So once the windows are documented and photographed and rubbed, we take them apart. We clean the glass. This is the detailed photograph of the angel window to the left of Cornelius that's been taken apart and glass cleaned. Another example of the dust and dirt and debris trapped between the layers, but this photograph is, it's important because it's a great example of not only talk about this specific foot or piece, not only is it laid with 3 layers of glass, but you can see that the tip of his boot, if you will, it actually bends up. It's about 1.5 inch gap between the 2 layers and the top layer. And as we're taking it apart, we're wondering, why did they have to do this? But when it was all completed and we put back together and installed, it's their uniqueness, the 3-dimensionality of the window. It literally looks like that foot is stepping out from the background of the window, and it just works. And they were truly geniuses in layering and plating windows and fabricating. So here, this is just sections of that foot that I was just talking about. On the top left is the original piece. And on the right, top right, we started to take the piece apart. You can see the 3 layers and how thick and high that lead is. Now on the bottom left and bottom right, on the bottom left, you can see we actually had to, going back to my previous slides about the uniqueness of plated windows and the different layers and how thick the glass is and the lead is different. So oftentimes we actually have to custom make our own lead and figure out how to make sure that the glass is actually wrapped and secured. And on the bottom right is that panel complete, leaded and soldered. And you can see how it actually sticks out from the background, from the rest of the window. And that the rest of that window is already 2 layers thick. And this foot, the tip of this foot of Cornelius just kind of sticks out, it's pretty amazing. And this is relating reassembly of the angel window. Again, very, very interesting and unique lead that we had to order, custom leads that had to be used and cut because of the different layers and the drapery glass. We can't just use one lead 1/4 inch or 3/8. Everything has to be custom cut and mimic. And this is where the documentation rubbing comes handy, where we document and we annotate all the information we need during re-leading and fabrication of the windows, so that we know exactly what size is the lead, what size it was, and how much to cut for this particular lead. Anyway, you can see on the bottom right, one of our employees is actually trimming back some of the lead that was used. On the bottom right, you can really see the different, it's almost like a topography of the layers. The base layer where the leaves and the flowers are is one lead. And then you can see where the actual lead sticks out vertically, where it's going to have to butt the plated sections and the drapery glass, and all that lead has to get bent and folded and then cut and trimmed back. It's just tedious work, as you can imagine. But here's a before and after of the angel window. I mean, the section of the angel window. And this is the Angeline Cornelius before on the left and after on the right. And you can really see here, and I want to preface what I'm saying, there's no Photoshop involved here. This is literally amount of dirt and dust and soot cleaned from the window on the photograph on the left, and on the right, you can see the difference. It's just incredible, the difference once you start cleaning all the dust and dirt and soot from the layers of glass. So moving on to today, we reinstalled Cornelius, the Angeline Cornelius window. I think it was July of 2019, and I'm sorry, 2020, 21. We started removing the clerestory windows. Tiffany windows, again, very bright and different. They're not heavily plated, if at all, actually, like the lower windows in the sanctuary, but they just give a lot of light, and it's just the sun coming through. This is the south elevation where we started, and the sun coming through the clerestory is just incredible. And still, with all the opalescent glass with the blue yellow streaks, it just really brightens up and gives the sanctuary a unique hue and color. So here's where we started this summer. That's the south elevation of the clerestory window on Newberry Street. Clerestory windows on Newberry Street. We've removed 7 windows. I know you can only see 5, but then there's a return on this side here on the southwest, if you will, transept. So how do you get there? It's about 80, 85 feet from the floor. Very challenging. To set up scaffolding to get up there would have been extremely expensive. And in working with the church, we're always trying to find ways to be economical and save the church money whenever possible. So we rented a lift. It's actually a pretty interesting aerial lift. It's about 30 inches wide. They had to bring it into the sanctuary, and it rolls right down to the sanctuary. We did have to remove the pews on the left side of the sanctuary to access the clerestory windows, but it was still a challenge. But it saved the church a lot of money. If scaffolding was the only option, it would have been not prohibitive, but very, very expensive. But we were glad to be able to find this lift that actually worked. So some of us are on the inside of the church chiseling, and you can see in the background the north elevation of the clerestory windows. We had scaffolding set up on the roof to access the exterior of the clerestory windows on the south elevation. And this is the south elevation from Newberry Street, which, by the way, I have to say, it was August, and I did not mind having this office for the month of August with everything going on. So it was pretty interesting, and I had a great view. But here's what we faced, and here's what we found once we started to examine and removing the windows. The lead deterioration was so severe that we had to, and I'm sure you can see tape on the images, we had to tape every single piece because these windows were so badly deteriorated. The lead was literally pulling away and pulling apart. Over the years, the windows, there were some repairs done over the years, some okay, some not great at all, and I'll show some slides later, but they've suffered from a variety of issues, obviously age, ill-advised repairs, shoddy repairs, people just applying silicone and caulking just to stop water from penetrating and repairing cracks. Glass was just pulling away from the lead. You can see on the photograph on the right, just lead pulling away and cracks and people just smudging silicone. And then not a great photograph as far as high resolution, but the photograph on the right, this window was removed at some point. We're not sure when, but it was removed and re-leaded previously. The photograph on the right is an original window that has not been altered or I'm going to say abused, if you will. But the window on the right, you can see these windows are supposed to match. They're supposed to be the same as far as glass coloring and all that, but you can see how different they are. The bottom panel is completely different. The three pieces of green glass that you see on the photograph on the left are not original. But then we move up to the top, and this mismatched glass and previous and repairs and replacements that they just threw whatever they had in the studio in there and just put it back in. And so now we're faced with the struggle and exercise of finding the right glass, which is a challenge, and it has not been easy. On the top is the bottom panel of that window I just showed, and on the bottom is what it's actually supposed to look like. It's the original panel from a different window, but the top panel is actually supposed to look like the bottom panel. And you can see how different the glass is. They had, whoever did this had no respect and no sensitivity to the glass and to the importance of these windows. Not, you just look at it, just not the glass and the color, but also the design. They added two bores instead of having a single bore at the bottom. It's just a mess, really. But we worked through it. So we started restoration of the clerestory windows in the studio. Again, documentation is the first step. It's one of our employees taking rubbings of one of the panels. Again, here's a rubbing on the right side. The panel is on the left side, and you can see all the annotations and all the information on the rubbing that's useful to us. This is an example of one of the panels before dismantling, before restoration. You can see on the right side, they smudged silicone to cover cracks. The windows are dismantled and cleaned. And I know you see all the little pieces of tape on the left photograph with numbers. Those are pieces that are being repaired, and we number each piece and number the tray where the pieces go, so they'll go back in their respective places. Every piece of glass that was cracked was repaired with epoxy, hextol epoxy. It's a two-part epoxy by weight. A lot of the pieces were tinted with dyes and orsol dyes and pigments, so that to match the color of the glass as close as possible. And there were hundreds. This is just an example, but there are hundreds of pieces cracked that need repair. Small example of the photograph on the right is before repair and restoration. The photograph on the right is that same piece repaired with epoxy. So we were able to get rid of that smudged silicone on that piece. And the windows are completely re-leaded. Then they're soldered on both sides. Then they're waterproofed on both sides. And then there's final cleaning of each panel. Now going back to this window, we call it window number 3. That's the numbering system that we have, and what we gave, we call it number 3, which has been really a thorn and a headache for us because of what was done to it before. Previously, it's a mess. But this bottom panel that totally didn't match the original what was there, so we took a rubbing of it, a drawing, if you will. We figured out what was the right glass to use. And this is one of the challenges in working with Tiffany windows and Opalescent windows. We often cannot find the exact glass in one single layer. So in this case, we actually had to plate and double the pieces so that we could match what the original panel looked like. Not all of it, but a lot of this new glass is plated so to match what the original panel looked like. And here's the top panel that was previously re-leaded. wrong with the wrong glass and all. And then the bottom is the panel that we just completed recently with the new glass plated so that it actually looks like what the original should look like. On the left is this one panel before restoration. On the right is the panel after restoration. So that window number 3, as we call it, the problem window, the bottom panel, we were able to find glass that worked to redesign and refabricate to match the original, but this top section, we're having a hard time finding some of the original glass. I've been calling and talking to glass manufacturers, send samples, and they all come back with, nah, we can't match that. So this one has been a bit of a challenge, and it's still, as you see it here in this photograph, you see all the dots, the green and red dots, those are all the pieces that need to be replaced. They're not original. You'll see the sheet of paper there telling us what the red dot should be and what glass should be where the green dots are, and so forth and so on. So this has been a bit of a challenge. We don't have a supplier for the glass yet. We are still researching, and we're optimistic and hopeful that we can find a glass. And even if we find something close, but then we have to plate it so that it looks like the original, we're willing to do that, but we're trying to find an original glass that can match the original as close as possible, or to at least do a better job than what was done previously. On the left side is the bottom section or the middle section of window number 3, and you can see the green columns are not original. Those were replaced previously. And on the right side, we were able to find the right glass that matched the original columns, but we still are searching for the 3 bottom squares with the X's you see here that were replaced previously that don't match the original at all. Again, I don't have a good high resolution photograph on the left for window number 3, but window number 3 on the left is supposed to look like window number 1 and 5 and so forth on the right side you see here on the photograph. So that's our goal and that's our challenge right now, but we're hopeful and we are optimistic that we will be able to find a glass. So we removed the windows, and Pastor Rob was nice enough to send me this photograph on the bottom right of what he sees now on the south. Claire story, the windows are gone. The openings are boarded up with bronze plexiglass. So there's a lot of light coming in. I'm not sure Pastor Rob is happy about that, but it definitely lets in a lot of light into the church. But I'm sure that they're all dying to get the windows back. And if you have not been to Church of the Covenant, I beg all of you to please go. It really is an icon. It really is such an important building. I know there's the Morse Museum in Florida with the Tiffany collection that they just gathered windows from all over the place and from different institutions and so forth. But Church of the Covenant is a building that was built, redesigned by Tiffany in the 1890s, I'm sorry, and it's still standing and it's still there with all the pews and the artwork, the chandelier. But it's not just a building that makes, it's not just the structure and the windows and the walls that makes this church. I have to say, having known Pastor Rob and Lucy Williams and Brian Bigler, and then I can go on and on. I forget the name of everybody, but there's such a great community and such a great group of people. And I just want to end by saying I'm so thankful and grateful for all of you and for being part of this church and this restoration effort.
Well, with that, Roberto, I want to thank you. And so many people in their comments have said, you have made this so understandable, this complicated process. I admire that. The audience admires that. Thank you so much for this, for your good work, and for the Reverend for supporting all this work. We have got so much going on in the chat, in the Q&A. It's been hard for me to keep track of, but I'm going to do my best because we have lots of questions. And I think the Reverend, we're going to start with you. People want to know, when can they enter the church? When can they go and visit?
We have something called Open Sanctuary, which runs generally April through December each year. And we were able, thankfully, to even have it open during COVID this past year. We have a wonderful staff that keeps it open. So come on by. It's open for prayer, for visits. We let folks in. And of course, every Sunday, once we get past Omicron, Sunday mornings, 10:30 a.m., you're welcome to join us for worship. It's open once we get past the Omicron.
Well, it seems like you're going to get a big crowd based on the response here. And one of the earlier questions that came on it has to do with the redecorating from the 1860s interiors. And that was that it was pretty extravagant what you were doing with Tiffany. Was there any debate over this? What was the response when it happened? Roberto, I don't know if you can answer this or Reverend can answer this. What was the response from people involved with the church?
So my understanding, and I wish we could vocalize some of our building stewards who are incredible, Lucy Williams and Brian Bigler and others, Charlene, James, who know this by heart. But my understanding in the 1890s, this was always, Church of the Covenant was always a working class, dedicated to the poor kind of a congregation living in the city, seeing that as part of their mission and ministry. But it also had touch points to folks who had some deeper pockets. And I believe those folks came in and helped donate money to make it happen. They did it all internally to fund this. And I can't imagine it was a very cheap endeavor, but they went window by window. And I think it was about 21 years that it took for the redecoration process to happen. And they, as you said, we didn't get those 4 in, which had some fascinating stories, the flight to Egypt and the child Jesus and the Magi and others. So again, I'll put my email in here so I can connect folks with the people who know these answers too. So if we don't get any more, you want more depth, you can contact me and I can put you in touch with them.
Great. So Roberto, lots of questions, some technical. One had to do with, well, actually there were several questions about the painted glass, and that had to do with what kind of paint was used. Was it applied directly or some other kind of method used? And what was your role in restoring that?
Are we talking about the 1865 window? I don't know.
I think they were talking about the faces.
Of the Tiffany windows?
Yes.
Okay, so we restored the 1865 only remaining original window that's in the church in the north transept. And those were, every piece of glass was painted. There were some pieces that were missing that need to be painted. Then we just used a traditional stained glass vitreous paint. For the Tiffany windows, the Cornelius, the Angeline Cornelius window, the only painted pieces were the flesh, and there was no issues with the paint. There was no need to touch up or repaint the flesh, so we didn't do anything to the painted piece in the Angeline Cornelius window.
So they didn't need any restoration at all?
No, just cleaning.
Just cleaning. And I have a question, and I'm going to insert my role here so I can. I understand there's a foundation that supplies churches and other organizations that are museums that are trying to restore their Tiffany with glass that has been assembled, was basically in the studio. Can you comment on that, or did you go to that foundation?
That's the NewsDat Foundation organization in New York.
Right.
And it's led by Lindsay Parrott, a colleague and friend of mine.
Who's on this call, by the way? Who's on this? She is on this.
Oh, good. I'm glad. They have the largest collection of Tiffany glass. And I don't want to speak for Lindsay, but yes, if a institution or church, or if you have a Tiffany windows that requires or glass is needed, you can submit or ask if the NewsDat Museum has that type of glass or that particular glass. And there's the whole different steps to get to that, and if they actually have the glass and to get to for you to use. We've tried in the past once actually for not to digress from this particular project, but still talk about Church of the Covenant. The Dorcas windows was vandalized several years ago, and we did send the NewsDat Museum samples of glass that we needed. And unfortunately, they did not have any of that glass. It was a very specific drapery textured glass and color. So we actually had to have the glass custom made. But to answer your question, yes, the NewsDat Museum and collection of Tiffany glass is there, and they're helpful, and they're a great organization, and it's a great resource.
And a question from Lindsay: what is the most number of plates you've seen in a window? 6 layers, as you referenced in your presentation, or more?
Tiffany, 6 windows. 6 layers.
6
in a Tiffany window. Lafarge, I've seen, actually, it's probably the same. So about 6. I'm going to say 6.
And have you had to reinforce the windows because of the weight? Is that ever an issue?
Well, part of the, one of the things we learn in restoration and conservation, one of the first things even before we remove a window, but then once we bring it into the studio, is why did it fail and where did it fail? And so, yes, there's times that if we feel that, okay, well, this area has 6 layers of glass and it was poorly fabricated or poorly designed, and I don't mean to say the word poorly as a criticism to the Tiffany studio or their craftsmen or Lafarge or whoever. It's just that obviously today we in restoring these pieces of art, we learn from their mistakes and we can make it better. So there's times that, yes, we have to augment the structural system by adding external bars or different support systems. So yes, but I want to say one thing before I forget, and it's important to mention, we don't, most of the times we remove windows and to be restored or conserved, they don't necessarily need to be completely dismantled and releaded. Myself and the guys that work for me, my fellow craftsmen and employees and partners, we really believe in maintenance and less is better and conservation of windows. As a matter of fact, more so than not, we don't take apart windows and re-lead them. The windows at Church of the Covenant that I've discussed tonight are actually very extreme situations where the lead was severely deteriorated and the windows did need to be completely re-leaded. I just want folks to be aware that your windows can be maintained, and that's my goal for all projects and all churches, and especially Church of the Covenant. In fact, the clear story windows and some of the other windows we've been looking at for the last 10, 15 years, we have made little adjustments in situ before last year when we removed them so that we could delay the need to remove them to be restored and re-leaded today. Just for folks, I don't see who's in the group and who's in the chat and who's in the webinar, but if there are any steward of churches and windows, Just be aware of the rampant salespeople that are going to tell you that your windows are 100 years old and they need to be removed and related, because that's not always the case. And in fact, it's usually not the case. And that's my spiel for tonight.
So Roberto, someone asks about, is there a protective coating on the outside to protect it from the weather?
No, they're not. The sanctuary, the nave aisle windows do have an exterior covering. The clerestory windows do not. We have not found any evidence that there was an exterior covering originally. And so I'm proposing, and I have proposed to the church to reinstall the windows without an exterior covering. They're about 80, 100 feet from the ground, and it's on Newbear Street. If they've been up there without a covering since 1890, I'm not sure that they need a covering now.
Okay. I'm going to switch to Reverend Mark for two questions. One has to do, what is the significance of the story of the angel and Cornelius?
Oh, that's a big one. So that's in the New Testament, in Acts, and it's a great story. So Cornelius is a Roman centurion in charge of a lot of soldiers, and he has this relationship through the angels. An angel comes to him, and an angel also simultaneously comes to Peter. And sends the two together, and it's really celebrated in the scriptures as one of the first expansions of the gospel beyond just the Jewish people. Jesus was a full Jew, and the Jewish story, and the expansion on that of the gospel and the story of God's love, moving out beyond just that part of the family, but to the what's so-called Gentile world, and the Roman, the imperial, the ones who killed Jesus. They were the Romans. They were the ones. Even the enemy was brought into the love of God, and it's a powerful story, and it's really amazing to have it restored. I mean, it is quite literally a place where you can see more light shining through after this restoration. You can read your hymnal a lot better when you're sitting under that window now. Thanks to Roberto.
You just answered another one of the questions about the quality of light, so thank you for that. The other one is that someone was asking if they wanted, obviously this restoration costs lots of money. I saw in the chat that you said you were counseling someone else who has some windows they're looking to restore about grants that are available. But if someone wanted to make a contribution, how would they do that? Could you put that in the chat or tell us?
This church relies on an incredible amount of generosity, and so even that question, I honor it, and I honor people giving to historic preservation, and specifically this church. I absolutely will put a link in the chat for people to do that. We have an easy way to do that at the church, and we really appreciate the generosity. And it's, again, standing on the shoulders of giants who've gone before us. So thank you.
Very good. Let's see. Roberto, did you also work on the lighting fixture you showed? Was that restored at the same time?
It was gently and lightly cleaned probably 10 years ago. Yes, there was a lift in the church, and I believe Pastor Rob can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was, I think, new light bulbs installed. And at that same time, I was called to go in and clean some of the glass.
Right. And I'm going to end with this question, and that is to Roberto. Are there up-and-coming conservators or in the field that you are involved with stained glass, leaded glass restoration?
Conservators?
Yes. Is there training for people coming up in the field, or do they apprentice with you, or how is that happening?
I wish. The United States does not have an apprenticeship like Europe does, and which is really a shame, because I and everybody else that works for me, we're all getting old. And so we really are hopeful and looking for people that want to, you know, are interested in conservation of stained glass windows. And there's no apprenticeship in this country. So I guess the quick answer is no. But we're always looking and hoping that someone with the right attitude and philosophy and respect and sensitivity for this craft comes along.
Well, Roberto, I want to thank you for your dedication to this profession and what you're doing, because it's affecting, giving great joy to people like myself and people in the audience who can see this magnificent work and the way it should be shown. And Reverend Mark, I want to thank you and your parishioners for supporting this restoration and preserving this, which is such an iconic building in Boston. And really, we're talking world-class here, folks. So if you have an opportunity to see the church, to support this great work, please do. And with that, we will make a recording available of this. Thank you all so much for attending tonight's presentation. And
Ken, thank you so much. Can I just say a word? I love that Roberto lifted this idea of improving on the mistakes from the past. And I just love that image, not condemning those who did the work authentically then, but building on the past. And I just love that image. And I appreciate Roberto and Ken, Historic New England. You guys are doing this work, and we bless you for it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
and have
you.
a good night.
Have a good night. Thank you.